Today I will be doing a painting demonstration of an orange Cattleya. The palette I will be using for this painting will be American Journey, Halloween Orange, Sap Green and Earthen Green, Daniel Smith, Quinacridone Red and Lemon Yellow, and Holbein, Ultramarine Blue Deep and Burnt Sienna. The painting on this one is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to be using about 2 or 3 colors for the oranges and the reds, and then I'm going to try to do some spatter. If you'll notice, the spatter pattern is going to come through this way. And one thing about the orchid that I wanted to mention that I forgot to do in the introduction was a unique characteristic of the orchid bloom, and that is it has bilateral symmetry. That means if you cut it a certain way that you can see a mirror image of the flower on either side. Now if you cut it this way or this way, it is not a mirror image, it's only one way. Now there are other flowers that have bilateral symmetry, but all the orchids have this. And it's also called zygomorphism. But it's an interesting characteristic of the orchid blooms. So we'll get started on this. I want to show you, we're going to be using a different kind of paper. This one is on 140-pound cold press paper, so it's got that rough surface. Today we're going to be using hot press paper. Hot press paper has a real smooth surface to it, if you remember, and so it's going to absorb the paint a little bit differently. We'll see how it goes. And I also outlined the sketch in ink so that it would be easier for you to see where we're going with it. One thing I decided to do before we got started was to tape up these 2 stems right here, because when I start my spattering, that will just help me keep the spatter off of those 2 little stems. First thing we'll do with the paint will be to lay down a little bit of yellow underneath, sort of an underlayer. Some of the highlight areas. You'll see that the paint sort of sits on the surface just a little bit longer. Plus I've had this paper for quite a while, so it has not really been primed with water. So it takes a minute for it to absorb. Hopefully that's drying fast enough. We'll see. I'm going to go ahead and put some of this pretty Halloween orange, which is sort of a yellow orange. I'm going to put that on right over it. On this central flower is going to be pretty much straight Halloween orange. I just decided not to wet the paper first. You can do that if you like to with water. Gives you a little more time to spread it and have it nice and even wash. I'll have to jump to another petal because I don't want them to run together. I'll take a risk and do these 2. They don't seem to be fully dry yet. If I was using 140-pound cold press, it probably would be dry. enough. I can see a little bit of run there, not too bad. I'm going to let those dry a little bit, and the next thing I'll do some of these outer florets. And I have two things I'm going to do. I'm going to take the Halloween orange and I'm going to mix it with a little bit of quinacridone red. That will deepen it just a little bit. And then on the darkest petals, I will mix a little bit of sienna with that. So I'll go ahead and mix up some quinacridone red and the Halloween orange. It's a pretty strong color, so I think I'll go this way. I'll just put a little bit of red with the orange. Let's test that. That's pretty good. You see the paper is almost slippery. It's a little more difficult, a little more challenging for some people to use this. So you see, it's pretty straightforward painting on this part. I'm going to demonstrate the darker color that I'm going to use, and then I'll just fill in the rest of this. We'll take some Halloween orange and some of the red and just put a little sienna with it. Let's see what we can get here. You see that? It's a little bit darker. It's almost like a brick color. There are a couple of petals that are darkest here on the outer edge, so I'll just do a couple of those for demonstration. So you can see the three colors I'm working with, the lighter orange, a little bit redder orange, and then the darkest with a little bit of sienna in it. And I think I'm going to need to let these dry. I'm going to fill in the rest of this. This is pretty straightforward painting here, and then we'll work on the spatter. And then at the end, I will put a few shadows in here and there, and we'll do also just fill in the stems with some sap green. Okay, I have the basic painting done. I've got the three different shades of orange and reds, and I would like to talk a little bit about spatter for just a few minutes. This is the original here, and what I did with this one was used a spatter screen, and it can be a little bit messy. You just put the paint on there and then you blow on it. You get a directional, and that's what I was trying to do here, sort of get a directional spray. So I'm going to do something different right now because this could go all over the place. So, but that's an option, and it's really nice. And then you can use just a brush that's loaded with paint, really wet paint, and just tap it. That's what we're going to do on the one that we're doing right now. Or you can use spray. I have this really nice spray bottle here with some ultramarine blue. That also is a little bit harder to control. So for the camera today, I'm going to do it this way. Also, you can use a toothbrush. This one right here is with the toothbrush. I don't know how well you can see that on camera, but it sprays out like this. And to get it to go away from you, that's the tricky part. You use a toothbrush and you want to pull, you load it with paint, and then you want to pull it toward you. So you can see I'm pulling it in this direction and it's going to go out that way. That's a little bit hard to control too, so I'm going to go the safe route on camera today and do it with just a loaded paintbrush. So I've done a little bit of preparation here. I prepared an acetate piece here. You can see where I marked it off and then cut it out. It's a little bit tedious, but you can do the same thing with paper. I'm going to try to spatter this area here first. You could tape around it. Just be careful when you tape it that when you pull it off, you don't pull some of the paper off. You can also prepare the tape so it may not tear the paper by putting it on some fabric first and then taping it. And remember, I did put tape on these stems here, this one and this one, but I'm going to try to concentrate on this section first. I've made a few little barriers here to try to keep it from spattering elsewhere. And so we'll try this one first, but this acetate, you don't have to use this. You can do the same thing with a piece of paper or a little bit heavier weight piece of paper, like a thin cardboard or something. Those are other options. I just happen to have some of this, so I thought I'd try that. Now, there's a possibility that the paint will come up underneath this transparency, and if you get it quick enough, you'll be able to lift it before it, in other words, there may be a couple of spatters that get underneath it, and we'll take care of that. We'll see how that works. Now, the trick to this is you've got to have a brush that is just really loaded and very wet with paint. I'm going to use the Ultramarine Deep, and if I don't get enough of an effect with this brush, I'll get a larger brush and do a few like that. And I'm going to just tap it pretty hard. See that? Getting some pretty good spatter. I want it to be maybe a little bit, a few big ones and a few small ones. Which is good. I don't really care on this one about the direction, but if you wanted a directional flow to the spatter, you could maybe use the toothbrush. You'll just have to put up a few more taller barriers and wider because it's going to go everywhere. I want it to be a little more concentrated down here toward the center. You don't want to say that you could add a few if you wanted to like that, if they're not big enough. All right, now I'm going to take this acetate off, see if anything got up underneath it and correct that, and then I'm going to flip it around and do this section down here. I did tape it down just a little bit in a couple places because I really didn't want it to move. And there is wet paint on this. Normally I would probably dry or wipe that off and then let it dry because I will smear the other. I think I may have to do that, so I'll be back in just a minute. Let this dry because I'm going to have to flip it around so I can place this one down here. So I'll let that dry for just a moment. I'm ready to do the bottom section now. Just going to do a little bit of prep and put this little acetate on here. I'm going to tack it down in a couple of places. We're going to do this section. Let's get the brush loaded up. Oh, not enough on there. So you really have to get it loaded on there. All right, I'm going to carefully try to take this off without smearing it too much. Oops, there, smeared it a little bit. And let's try, I'm going to just use a piece of paper right here. Try to get a little bit in this section. We can fix that. It's no problem. All right. So you can do it with paper. And if you don't want to risk it, you just need a few. I'm going to turn it around. You can add a few. Just want a couple here. Try to make them various sizes. Let's see if we can fix that. Might be able to lift some of it so it won't be all that noticeable. You see how I did that? Just wetting the brush, getting the extra moisture off, and then lifting it. You just have to be very patient with it. You see that? That got most of it. And then another trick, you can camouflage it if you want. Put another one, another little blotch there. Here's one you might want to lift just a little bit. It's going into the orange a little bit. All right, let's stop there. It's wet, so just doctor it up a little bit. I think I want to start over with this one again because it was too wet. So you may just have to wait until it dries. One thing about the ultramarine, it does lift pretty easily. I'm going to take that whole section out. You may have to be careful not to work the paper too much on hot press paper because it may come apart. Now, when that dries, I'll insert another couple of dots in there and that will look pretty good. You could probably clean that one up a little bit. All right, we'll just move on. I'll do a little more doctoring and take all this tape off. You might want to wait until that dries or you'll get paint all over your hands because there'll be some wet dots probably on the paint, on the tape. By the way, when I did this sap green, I added a little bit of yellow in with it just to make it a very light green. So I will go ahead and finish these two stems while this is drying. Well, I've added a few more dots and made a few corrections, and now really the only thing we need to do is to put some shadowing and maybe some highlights in. That can take quite a bit of time, but I'll get started with the middle flower, and I'm going to go just a slightly deeper shade than the light orange that I did in the beginning. I'm just going to try to define some of the edges, just make it look like it's not quite so flat. And I have a little mixture of the orange with just a tiny bit of the red in it. Now to get rid of these hard lines right here, I usually take a second brush, or you could use the same one, but I'm going to use a different one. And before it dries, just with a moist brush, just sweep through here, and it works a lot better if this is totally dry. the original layer is totally dry. You see how I softened up that edge? I let that one get a little bit too dry. But you get the idea. Sort of sweep through it. Just soften it up a little bit. Actually, I'm going to also maybe put a glaze on top with a little yellow, especially in this middle part. You get the idea on that. Normally I wouldn't have these ink lines here, but because I did that it does look a little awkward, but it's okay. I'll do a few of these darker ones in just a minute. Let's do this. Also, you can smooth out any of the little awkward lines that form sometimes. So never give up on a painting. You may say, oh, I don't like this, especially when it's wet. But give it a chance. There are a lot of things you can do to fix it. Also, one other thing that might be fun, let me just try it real quickly. On some of these that are sort of curved petals, you can lift some here. You don't want just a solid color. You lay down a solid color when you first begin, but then by the time you finish, you have all of your highlights and shadows and things. See how that's making it a little bit less flat. Some colors lift easier than others. That looks good. Just make it where it doesn't look flat. And just a couple more. These need to be a little darker over here, your highlights and shadows. You can always check the reference photo. And you can keep doing that all around. Switched brushes. There was one area over here let me work on for just a minute because it's another flower. I actually made a mistake here on the inking. This is supposed to be one piece here. I know that's probably a little hard to see. There's quite a bit of yellow in this throat right here. See if I can get it in there without it running into the other section. I want to try one thing. The yellow didn't show much in here, so you could lift some and then add the yellow, or just leave it. That looks pretty good because we had the underlayer earlier of yellow and it's dried, so that's still there. It didn't really come up. So you can see the yellow popping through. But you can fiddle with this for a long time. Just keep doing it until you get everything the way you like it. One more thing on the stems. I've got to do a little something with them. Turn it around. I'd like to just maybe highlight the top edge and then shadow the bottom edge, just to give it a little depth. I'll use some earth and green, a little darker green. I put a little yellow on top. Let's smooth out that edge. You can do that to all the stems if you want to. It's not meant to be a super realistic painting, but it's always nice to do a little bit of those additions. I believe that's all I'll do on this one, and I think this one is complete. I hope you will join me for demonstration 2, where I will feature this beautiful purple and white Cattleya orchid. Until then, have fun painting, enjoy it. Thanks. See you next time.